Welcome to Miss Lovedoll's video on predicting dominant and recessive traits in offspring using classical genetics. I noticed something about our class data for the seed lab. Oops, did you? If you didn't, go back and check it out. We replicated an experiment done over 150 years ago by an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel. Here's a picture of Gregor Mendel now. Hi, Gregor. In the 1950s, Gregor Mendel studied how traits were inherited. This was way before DNA and genes were discovered. His work is known as classical genetics, and the ideas are still used today, 150 years later, to understand how traits are passed from parents to offspring. However, with our knowledge of modern genetics, we know that Gregor Mendel's work had some oversimplifications. For example, in classical genetics, genes are either dominant or recessive, no in between. Geneticists know that this is not completely true, but for the purpose of learning about genes in 7th grade, we're going to start with the simplified case. The other oversimplification is that characteristics are controlled by just one gene. That's not exactly true either. Eye color, height, all characteristics really are controlled by many genes, not just one. But for the time being, we're going to study the behavior of single genes. Mendel proposed a theory that there are two possible versions of each allele, or each gene. In modern genetics, we call these versions alleles. A dominant allele is the version of a gene that will dominate or cover up a recessive allele. The recessive allele is still there, but for the recessive version of the gene to appear in the offspring, the dominant allele cannot be present. Even if the recessive allele is present, the dominant allele is the version of the gene that is expressed in the organism. Geneticists represent dominant alleles with capital letters and recessive alleles with lowercase letters. You always use the same letter to represent either a dominant or a recessive allele for the gene. In our video on meiosis, you learned that each parent passes only one allele for the trait onto its offspring. We start off with body cells. Remember, when the gametes are created at the end of meiosis, there is only half of a chromosome pair in each gamete, or sperm and egg cell. Meiosis is where the chromosomes, or the alleles, are separated. So let's look at one chromosome up close and see what it looks like as it goes through meiosis. Along the DNA that makes up a chromosome are segments that are the genes for the trait. Suppose this section along the chromosome is the gene for pigment in plants. The allele could be dominant, and we'd express that with a capital G, or it could be recessive, and we'd express that with a lowercase g. Suppose two plants are bred together. One plant is purebred dominant for green pigment, and the other is purebred recessive, lowercase g, meaning that it cannot produce green pigment. When these two plants produce offspring, each plant gives one allele to the offspring. In this case, the green purebred plant only has uppercase or dominant genes to donate, and the yellow purebred plant only has lowercase g's or recessive genes to donate. The offspring have one dominant allele for pigment, represented by the capital G, and one recessive allele, represented by the lowercase g. Can you predict what color the offspring will be? If you said green, you're right. The offspring have a dominant allele for green pigment that overwhelms or covers up the recessive allele, so the plant can make green pigment. The recessive allele is still there, but it's like it's not activated. And now you know how traits are passed from purebred parents to their offspring using classical genetics. Tune into part 2 to find out how traits are passed to offspring from different combinations of parents. Bye-bye.